Welcome, dear viewers, to a tale that will curdle your blood and haunt your thoughts long after the screen goes dark. Tonight, we delve into a story shrouded in mystery, a story that whispers of desperation, dark desires, and a chilling discovery that defied all explanation. We are about to uncover the spine-chilling case of 5 heads in a glass jar and the wish of the crippled man. This is a journey into the shadows of the human soul, a place where reality is more terrifying than any nightmare. If you're a fan of stories that linger, that make you question the world you think you know, then you've come to the right place. But before we begin, I implore you, subscribe to our channel. Turn on the notifications so you never miss another descent into the macabre. Your support allows us to continue bringing these unsettling narratives to light. Now, lock your doors, dim the lights, and prepare yourselves. The story is about to begin. The fishing village of Port Blossom was a place where time seemed to move differently, slower, like the gentle lapping of the waves against its shores. The air, thick with the scent of salt and drying nets, usually carried with it a sense of tranquility. But on a day that would forever be etched in the village's memory, that tranquility was shattered, replaced by a chilling silence that even the gulls seemed to respect. It began with a storm, a tempest of such ferocity that the oldest fishermen, their faces a roadmap of wrinkles from years at sea, couldn't recall anything like it. For 3 days and 3 nights, the heavens unleashed their fury, and the sea, once a provider, became a raging beast. When the storm finally subsided, it left behind a world remade in its own chaotic image. The beach, usually a pristine stretch of sand, was now a graveyard of debris-splintered wood from fishing boats, tangled nets, and the sad, bloated carcasses of marine life. It was amidst this wreckage that a young boy named Finn, his curiosity as vast as the ocean before him, made the discovery. He was searching for treasures the storm might have washed ashore, his small hands sifting through the seaweed and driftwood. Then he saw it, a large glass jar, its surface caked with sand and brine, nestled amongst a pile of debris. It was the sheer size of it that first caught his eye, far larger than any jar he had ever seen. With a grunt of effort, he managed to pull it free. As he wiped away the grime, a gasp escaped his lips, a sound swallowed by the roar of the receding waves. Inside the jar, floating in a murky, yellowish liquid, were 5 human heads. Their eyes were closed, their faces pale and serene, as if they were merely sleeping. Their hair, a medley of colors from a fiery red to a raven black, swayed gently with the movement of the liquid. The sight was so grotesque, so utterly out of place in the peaceful village of Port Blossom, that for a moment, Finn thought he was dreaming, caught in the throes of a nightmare conjured by the storm. But the cold, hard glass beneath his fingers was real, and so were the 5 silent faces staring back at him. News of the discovery spread through Port Blossom like wildfire. The villagers, their faces a mixture of horror and disbelief, gathered on the beach, their hushed whispers a stark contrast to the usual boisterous energy of the fishing community. The local constable, a man more accustomed to dealing with petty thefts and drunken brawls, was at a loss. He had never encountered anything like this in his 30 years of service. The jar and its gruesome contents were carefully transported to the small, 1-room morgue, and a call was made to the nearest city, a call that would bring Detective Miles Corbin to their shores. Corbin was a man haunted by the ghosts of his past. A brilliant detective in his prime, he had been relegated to the quiet corners of the department after a case went horribly wrong, a case that had cost him his partner and a piece of his soul. He arrived in Port Blossom with a weary resignation, expecting a simple case of a body washed ashore. But what he found was a puzzle that defied all logic, a macabre tableau that seemed to have sprung from the pages of a Gothic novel. The 5 heads were of 4 women and 1 man. There were no signs of violence on their faces, no indication of how they had met their end. The autopsies revealed nothing, no poison, no trauma, nothing that could explain their deaths. It was as if they had simply ceased to be. The liquid in the jar was an enigma as well, a strange concoction of salt water and a preservative that the lab had never seen before. As the investigation began, A sense of unease settled over Port Blossom. The villagers, once a close-knit community, now looked at each other with suspicion. Who could have done such a thing? And why? The questions hung in the air, as thick and suffocating as the fog that often rolled in from the sea. Days turned into weeks, and Corbin found himself no closer to solving the mystery. The faces of the 5 heads haunted his dreams, their serene expressions a silent mockery of his efforts. He interviewed every resident of Port Blossom and the surrounding areas, but no one had seen or heard anything. It was as if the jar had simply materialized on the beach, a gruesome gift from the storm. It was during one of his sleepless nights, as he sat in the dimly lit makeshift office the constable had provided for him, that a new piece of the puzzle fell into place. A report came in from a neighboring town of a missing person, a young woman with fiery red hair. Her description matched one of the heads in the jar. Soon, more missing person reports trickled in from other coastal towns, each one matching another of the heads. The victims were all strangers to each other, from different walks of life, their only connection being that they had all disappeared without a trace. As Corbin delved deeper into the lives of the victims, a pattern began to emerge. They were all individuals who had been on the fringes of society, people who wouldn't be missed right away. A runaway teenager, a drifter, a woman estranged from her family. It was a chilling realization, the work of a predator who preyed on the invisible, the forgotten. The investigation led Corbin down a rabbit hole of dark local legends and forgotten folklore. He heard whispers of a sea witch who granted wishes in exchange for a terrible price, of a phantom ship that sailed the coast on stormy nights, its crew a collection of lost souls. The rational detective in him dismissed these as the ramblings of a superstitious community, but a part of him, the part that had seen the darkness that lurked in the hearts of men, couldn't completely ignore them. It was an old fisherman, his eyes as gray and weathered as the sea, who finally gave Corbin a lead. He spoke of a man who lived in a secluded cove a few miles up the coast, a man known only as the Crippled Man. He was a recluse, a man who had been ostracized by the village years ago after a boating accident had left him disfigured and unable to walk. The fisherman spoke of him with a mixture of pity and fear, whispering of strange lights seen coming from his cove on stormy nights, of a man who seemed to have an unnatural connection to the sea. Driven by a gut feeling he couldn't explain, Corbin decided to pay the Crippled Man a visit. The cove was a desolate place, a crescent of black sand and jagged rocks, accessible only by a treacherous, winding path. The Crippled Man's shack was a ramshackle affair, built from driftwood and salvaged materials, a testament to a life lived in isolation. He found the man sitting on his porch, his twisted legs propped up on a stool, his eyes fixed on the horizon. His face was a mask of scars, his body a cruel sculpture of pain. But it was his eyes that held Corbin's attention. They were a startling shade of blue, as deep and mysterious as the ocean itself, and they held a wisdom that seemed to transcend his broken body. The Crippled Man, whose real name was Silas, was not surprised by Corbin's visit. He had been expecting him, he said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. As Corbin questioned him, Silas listened patiently, his gaze never leaving the detective's face. He denied any knowledge of the jar or the heads, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, a shadow that hinted at a hidden truth. As Corbin was about to leave, his frustration mounting, he noticed something glinting in the corner of the shack. It was a collection of glass jars, of all shapes and sizes, each one filled with a strange, luminescent liquid. And in each jar, there was a single, perfect seashell. When asked about the jars, Silas simply smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "Everyone has a wish, detective," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "And every wish has a price." As Corbin made his way back to Port Blossom, the Crippled Man's words echoed in his mind. He had a feeling, a chilling certainty, that he had just met the man who held the key to the spine-chilling case of the 5 heads in a glass jar. The question was, what was the wish of the Crippled Man? And what terrible price had been paid to grant it? The storm had brought the jar to their shores, but Corbin knew, with a growing sense of dread, that the real storm was yet to come. The weight of the crippled man's words settled upon Detective Corbin like a shroud. "Everyone has a wish, Detective. And every wish has a price." The phrase looped in his mind, a cryptic and unsettling refrain that seemed to hold the key to the entire grotesque puzzle. He knew, with an instinct honed by years of navigating the darkest corridors of human nature, that Silas was not just a recluse living in self-imposed exile. He was a keeper of secrets, a man whose story was interwoven with the fate of the 5 souls in the glass jar. Corbin returned to the makeshift police station in Port Blossom, the image of Silas's shack, with its collection of glowing jars, seared into his memory. He spent the next few days in a state of obsessive focus, poring over old village records, maritime charts, and newspaper archives. He was searching for something, anything, that could connect Silas to the victims, a thread that could unravel the tapestry of this macabre mystery. He learned that Silas, whose full name was Silas Blackwood, had not always been a cripple. He was once a proud and respected fisherman, known for his uncanny ability to read the sea, to know its moods and its secrets. He had a wife, a beautiful woman named Alara, whose laughter was said to be as musical as the song of the sirens. They had a daughter, Lily, a child with hair the color of spun gold and eyes as blue as the summer sky. They were a happy family, the heart of the Port Blossom community. Then came the accident. A sudden, violent squall had caught Silas's boat, the Alara's song, miles from shore. The boat was found splintered and broken on the rocks, but there was no sign of Silas, Alara, or Lily. For weeks, the village mourned their loss, their grief a heavy cloud that hung over the normally cheerful community. Then, a month later, Silas washed ashore, clinging to a piece of driftwood, his body broken, his mind shattered. He was the sole survivor. The village that had once celebrated him now looked upon him with a mixture of pity and suspicion. Whispers followed him like his own shadow. Some said he had sacrificed his wife and daughter to the sea to save himself. Others spoke of a dark pact, a deal made with an ancient sea entity in the heart of the storm. Unable to bear the accusing glances and the hushed gossip, Silas retreated to the secluded cove, becoming the crippled man, a ghost of his former self. The more Corbin learned about Silas's past, the more he became convinced that the key to the present lay buried in the tragedy of his past. He decided to pay Silas another visit, but this time he would not come as a detective, but as a man seeking a story. He found Silas on his porch as he had before, his gaze fixed on the endless expanse of the ocean. He didn't seem surprised to see Corbin. It was as if he had been waiting for him. Corbin didn't start with questions about the jar. Instead, he asked about Alara and Lily. For a long time, Silas was silent, his only response the tightening of his jaw, the clenching of his fists. Then, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting a golden glow upon the water, he began to speak. His voice, at first a hesitant whisper, grew stronger as he unburdened his soul. He spoke of the storm not as a natural phenomenon, but as a living, breathing entity, a malevolent force that had targeted his boat with a terrifying intelligence. He described the waves, like mountains of black water, crashing down upon them, the wind screaming like a banshee. He spoke of his desperate fight to save his family, of the moment when a massive wave had torn Lily from his arms, her small hand slipping from his grasp. He remembered Alara's scream, a sound that was quickly swallowed by the roar of the tempest, as she dove into the churning water after their daughter. He had tried to follow her, but a falling mast had pinned him, crushing his legs, his world dissolving into a symphony of pain and darkness. When he awoke, he was alone, the storm gone, the sea calm, the wreckage of his life floating around him. But his story didn't end there. As he lay on the brink of death, adrift on the vast, indifferent ocean, he had a vision. A woman, her body formed from the mist and the sea foam, her eyes the color of pearls, had appeared before him. She was the sea witch, an ancient being of immense power, a grantaire of wishes. She offered him a deal. She could not bring back the dead, she had told him, for the sea was a jealous mistress and did not give up its treasures. But she could give him a part of them, a memory, a vessel to hold his love and his grief. The price, she had said, was a simple one. He had to bring her 5 souls, 5 individuals who would not be missed, 5 lives to balance the one she would grant him. Desperate, consumed by a grief so profound that it had become a physical ache, Silas had agreed. The sea which had given him a jar, a vessel forged from the heart of a fallen star, and a single perfect seashell. The shell, she had explained, would guide him, would sing a song that only the lonely and the lost could hear. Over the years, Silas had carried out his end of the bargain. He had used the seashell to lure 5 people to his cove, 5 souls adrift in the sea of life. A runaway teenager fleeing an abusive home, a drifter with no family to speak of, a woman who had lost her will to live after the death of her child. He had offered them solace, a listening ear, a moment of peace. And then he had taken their lives, a painless, a quiet end, their last breath a sigh of relief. He had placed their heads in the jar, a grotesque offering to the sea witch. In return, the sea witch had kept her promise. After he had delivered the 5th head, she had given him what he had wished for. It wasn't the return of his wife and daughter, but something far more ethereal, far more haunting. Silas led Corbin into his shack. The air inside was thick with the scent of the sea and something else, something sweet and cloying. He pointed to the collection of glass jars, the ones Corbin had noticed on his first visit. Each one contained a single, perfect seashell, glowing with a soft, otherworldly light. "They are not just shells, detective," Silas said, his voice filled with a strange mixture of reverence and sorrow. He picked up one of the jars. "Listen." Corbin leaned closer. From within the jar, he could hear a faint, melodious sound, a gentle, humming melody. It was a lullaby, a song a mother would sing to her child. "It is the song of the sea," Silas whispered, a single tear tracing a path through the scars on his face. "It is the song of my Alara." He then picked up another jar. From this one came the sound of a child's laughter, a pure, innocent sound that seemed to fill the small shack with a warmth that belied the grim reality of their situation. "And this," Silas said, his voice choking with emotion, "is the laughter of my Lily." Corbin was speechless. He was a man of logic, of facts and evidence. But what he was witnessing defied all rational explanation. He was standing in a shack with a man who had confessed to 5 murders, a man who had made a pact with a mythical creature, a man who had traded 5 lives for the ghostly echoes of his lost family. "The jar with the 5 heads," Corbin finally managed to ask, his voice hoarse. "What happened to it?" Silas explained that after he had fulfilled his part of the bargain, the sea witch had taken the jar, a trophy of their transaction. He had not seen it since. He had assumed it was at the bottom of the ocean, a dark secret hidden in the abyss. The storm, he believed, had been a sign, a message from the sea, a reckoning for his sins. As Corbin left the cove that night, the moon casting a silver path upon the water, he was a man torn. He had a confession, a solution to the case that had baffled him. But he also had a story, a tale of love, loss, and a desperation so profound that it had driven a man to commit unspeakable acts. He knew what he had to do. He had to arrest Silas, to bring him to justice. But he also knew that the true villain of this story was not the crippled man, but the insatiable sea and the dark, ancient secrets it held within its depths. The case of the 5 heads in a glass jar was closed, but for Detective Miles Corbin, the haunting melody of the sea and the echo of a child's laughter would forever be a reminder of the day he had come face to face with a wish and its terrible, terrible price. The confession of Silas Blackwood, the crippled man, should have brought a sense of closure to the case that had plagued Port Blossom. But for Detective Miles Corbin, it was the beginning of a new, more profound turmoil. The line between justice and vengeance, between the explainable and the supernatural, had blurred, leaving him adrift in a sea of moral ambiguity. He had arrested Silas, of course. The law demanded it. The quiet, almost serene way Silas had accepted his fate was more unsettling than any protestation of innocence could have been. As Corbin had led him away from the cove, Silas had only one request: to be allowed to bring the 2 jars, the ones containing the echoes of his wife and daughter. Corbin, against his better judgment, had agreed. The trial was a spectacle. The story of the crippled man and the sea which became a sensation, a modern-day myth that captured the public's imagination. The prosecution painted Silas as a cold, calculating killer who had used a local legend to mask his heinous crimes. They brought in experts who dismissed the sounds from the jars as a natural phenomenon, a trick of acoustics and the power of suggestion. But Corbin knew what he had heard. He had heard the lullaby and the laughter. He had seen the look in Silas's eyes, a look of a man who was both a monster and a victim, a man who had lost everything and had been willing to do anything to get a piece of it back. During the trial, Silas remained silent, his gaze fixed on the 2 jars that sat on the evidence table. He seemed to be in a world of his own, a world filled with the ghosts of his past. He didn't deny his crimes, but he didn't show any remorse either. His only defense was his story, a story that most people dismissed as the ravings of a madman. But there were some who believed him. The old fisherman who had first told Corbin about Silas, the villagers who had known him before the accident, they saw the truth in his tale. They knew the power of the sea, its ability to give and to take, to create and to destroy. They spoke of the sea which in hushed tones, a local legend that they had always feared and respected. As the trial progressed, a strange, palpable tension began to grip Port Blossom. The weather turned, the sky a perpetual canvas of gray, the sea a restless, churning mass of black water. It was as if the ocean itself was angry, its fury a reflection of the injustice that was unfolding in the small courtroom. Then, on the final day of the trial, as the jury was about to deliver its verdict, it happened. A storm, more ferocious than the one that had brought the jar of heads to their shores, descended upon Port Blossom. The wind howled like a tortured soul, the rain fell in sheets, and the waves, like monstrous claws, clawed at the land. The courtroom was plunged into darkness as the power went out. Panic erupted, the shouts and screams of the people a chaotic symphony of fear. And in the midst of the chaos, a strange, ethereal light began to emanate from the 2 jars on the evidence table. The light grew brighter and brighter, until it filled the entire room, a soft, pearlescent glow that silenced the aureus. And then, a voice, a woman's voice, as ancient and as powerful as the sea itself, echoed through the courtroom. The debt has been paid. The wish has been granted. But the sea is a jealous mistress. It does not like to be cheated. A massive wave, defying all laws of nature, crashed through the courtroom walls, a torrent of salt water and fury. The wave seemed to have a will of its own, a singular purpose. It swept past the screaming crowd, past the judge and the jury, and headed straight for the evidence table. It engulfed the 2 jars, and for a moment, the light and the sound intensified, a symphony of a lullaby and a child's laughter, a final, beautiful farewell. Then, as quickly as it had come, the wave receded, taking with it the 2 jars, leaving behind a trail of seaweed and salt water. But it wasn't just the jars that were gone. Silas Blackwood, the crippled man, was also gone. He had been sitting in the defendant's box, but now it was empty. It was as if he had been erased, swallowed by the sea, his fate forever intertwined with the tragic story of his family. When the storm finally subsided, Port Blossom was a village transformed. The courtroom was in ruins, a testament to the power of the sea. The case of the 5 heads in a glass jar was officially closed, the defendant having vanished without a trace. But for Detective Miles Corbin, the story was far from over. He had been a witness to something that defied all logic, an event that had shaken the very foundations of his beliefs. He left Port Blossom a changed man, the haunting melody of the sea and the echo of a child's laughter a permanent part of his soul. He never spoke of what he had seen in the courtroom that day, but he never forgot it either. He knew that the sea which was real, that the wish of the crippled man had been a real, and that the price had been paid in full. The 5 heads in the glass jar were a testament to a man's love and his desperation, a grim reminder that in the face of unimaginable loss, the line between good and evil can become as fluid and as treacherous as the sea itself. And so, the story of the spine-chilling case of 5 heads in a glass jar and the wish of the crippled man became a part of Port Blossom's folklore. A cautionary tale whispered by fishermen on stormy nights. A tale of a man who had dared to bargain with the sea, and of the terrible, beautiful, and haunting price he had paid for his wish. A price that was as deep, as mysterious, and as eternal as the ocean itself. Years passed. The story of Silas Blackwood, the 5 heads, and the storm that had claimed the courtroom became woven into the very fabric of Port Blossom. It was no longer a fresh wound, but a scarred-over legend, a piece of folklore told with a shiver to wide-eyed tourists and misbehaving children. The village had rebuilt the courthouse, fishing boats once again dotted the harbor, and the rhythm of life, dictated by the tides, seemed to have returned to normal. But it was a fragile normality. An unspoken truth lingered in the salty air. The sea remembered. On the anniversary of the storm, a quiet reverence would fall over the village. No boats would leave the harbor, and small, simple offerings of wildflowers would be left on the shore, a gesture of respect to a power they had witnessed but could never comprehend. For Miles Corbin, time had offered no such peace. He had retired from the force not long after the trial, the certainty and logic of his profession having been shattered by the impossible events he had witnessed. He was a man adrift, haunted not by the faces in the jar, but by the sound of a lullaby and a child's laughter. He had tried to rationalize it, to find a scientific explanation for the wave, for the vanishing of Silas Blackwood. But in the quiet hours of the night, when the world was still, the truth he had seen with his own eyes would resurface, undeniable and terrifying. He had borne witness to a reckoning, a transaction between a broken man and an ancient power, and the experience had left an indelible mark on his soul. It was this unresolved disquiet that drew him back to Port Blossom a decade after the trial. He arrived not as a detective, but as a pilgrim, drawn to the site of his own unraveling. The village had changed, yet it was the same. The faces were older. The children he remembered were now young adults with their own families. But the same guarded look appeared in their eyes when they recognized him. He was a part of their legend now, the city detective who had stood at the epicenter of the storm. He walked the familiar paths, his gaze constantly drawn to the horizon, to the endless gray-blue expanse of the ocean. He found himself standing before the treacherous path leading to Silas's Cove. The villagers considered it cursed ground now, a place of deep sorrow that was to be avoided. With a heavy heart, Corbin made the journey, the path more overgrown and difficult than he remembered, as if nature itself were trying to reclaim the scar on its landscape. The shack was gone. All that remained were a few splintered planks and the stone foundation, a skeletal reminder of the life that had been lived there. The ocean had relentlessly battered the cove, washing away almost all traces of Silas Blackwood. Corbin stood amidst the ruins, the roar of the waves filling the silence. He didn't know what he was looking for. Absolution? An answer? A sign that he hadn't imagined it all? As he turned to leave, a glint of light caught his eye. Half buried in the sand and wedged between 2 rocks of the foundation was a small, tin box, rusted and warped by years of exposure to the elements. With trembling hands, he pried it open. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a journal. Silas's journal. Corbin sat on the cold stones of the foundation, the sea spray misting his face, and began to read. The entries, written in a cramped, desperate hand, chronicled Silas's life after the accident. They detailed his all-consuming grief, his descent into isolation, and the night of the storm when he had first encountered the sea witch. His account was just as he had told Corbin, a pact made in the depths of despair. But as Corbin read on, he discovered the true, horrifying depth of the bargain. The 5 souls were not merely a payment. They were an anchor. The sea witch, Silas wrote, did not deal in memories. She dealt in essences, in fragments of life. The lullaby and the laughter were not echoes. They were sentient pieces of Alara's and Lily's souls, torn from the natural cycle of life and death and bound to the shells, trapped in a state of perpetual, beautiful sorrow. The wish had not been to hear them again. The wish had been to have them again. And the sea which, in her cruel, literal interpretation of the bargain, had granted it. She had given him living pieces of his family, but in doing so, had damned them to an eternity as prisoners of the sea, their consciousness bound to the glowing jars. The final entry was dated the morning of the trial's last day. It was not the writing of a madman, but of a man who had finally understood the monstrous nature of his wish. She gave me their song and their laughter, Silas wrote, but she did not give me their peace. I listen to them and I feel my love, but I also feel their cage. They are not memories. They are my beloveds, trapped. The price was not the 5 souls I took. The price was their freedom. The sea is a jealous mistress, the old saying goes. But it is not jealousy. It is possession. It owns what it takes. And now it owns a part of them forever. There is only one way to be with them now. Not just to hear them, but to join them in their prison. The storm is coming. She is coming to collect her final payment. She is coming for me. Corbin closed the journal, the brittle pages feeling like ancient scripture in his hands. He finally understood. The wave that had crashed into the courtroom was not an act of random fury. It was a collection. The sea which had not come to punish Silas, but to complete the transaction. His life had been the final, unspoken clause in their contract. He had traded 5 lives for the eternal echoes of his family, and in the end, he had traded his own to join them. He wasn't erased. He was reunited, his own essence now a part of the vast, sorrowful prison he had created for his wife and daughter. A profound, chilling peace settled over Miles Corbin. The mystery was solved, not by evidence or deduction, but by a terrible, supernatural truth. He was no longer a detective haunted by an unsolved puzzle, but a man humbled by a tragedy that transcended human law. He stood up and looked out at the ocean, which now seemed different. It was no longer just a body of water. It was a sepulchre, a beautiful, ageless tomb holding the eternal love and sorrow of the Blackwood family. He tossed the tin box into the waves, letting the sea reclaim its final secret. As he walked away from the cove for the last time, a gentle breeze blew in from the water, carrying with it a sound so faint it might have been the cry of a distant gull, or the whisper of the wind through the rocks. But Miles Corbin knew what it was. It was the soft, melodic strain of a lullaby, a final, heartbreaking echo from the deep. He did not turn back. Some stories have no end, and some wishes, once granted, can never be undone.